Okay, everybody. Thank you for tuning in and discipleship and the different things that go on with the idea of discipling. It's not a subject that you hear a lot about, at least in many congregations that I've been a part of. I haven't heard a lot of teaching over this subject. So I think it's very good for us to have this information out there. Again, this is kind of a Bible class format. We're minus one person. Josh is not able to join us. He and his family are off doing some vacationing, having some fun, I hope. So we're minus Josh tonight, but still have Riel, Andrew, and Ariana with me tonight to participate in this discussion. Last couple episodes we talked about the idea of the three key elements in a discipling relationship. And I thought it might be good to kind of talk about some practical sides of some of this, of the discipling process. And so I thought we would talk about just a few different things, starting with the idea of how do you find somebody to disciple you? Right? We're talking about discipleship. So I'm just going to kind of kick that off and let you guys take that question. When it talks about the idea of discipling, and you're looking for somebody to disciple you, what do you think you should look for? How should you go about it? That whole process. What do you guys think?
So it was interesting to me to be able to thinking about this because I have you and my mom, and so as my parents, y'all have discipled me, and we still have that relationship. And so I was like, well, I've never really had to look for that. So if I was going to do that, what would I look for? And there were a couple of things that came to my mind. And the first was that you want to look for someone who is very spiritually mature and sound in their doctrine and what they believe about the Bible. And someone that studies it for themselves to find the truth, and someone that you trust, was what came to my mind.
Okay, good.
I will say that I don't think I've ever looked for anyone to disciple me. And that's not because I didn't need anyone to disciple me. It's more because I didn't know I needed someone to disciple me. So I spent a lot of my youth growing up, and a good part of when I first got baptized, just kind of going with the flow, I guess. Just kind of doing what my whole family did, what I've done my whole life. I never really... and so I just didn't really look for anybody to disciple me. So I didn't really know what to look for up until that point. And then I had a guy who was like, hey, if I don't have a kid come to preacher training camp with me, then I can't go either. And I was like, okay, I'll go. and then that was the start of the discipleship that Mr. Jonathan has given with me. Because that was the point at which I started getting this wisdom and this experience imparted in me, and this ability to be able to get out of my comfort zone. And even though it's still not comfortable getting out of my comfort zone, I can get out of my comfort zone, and I know that I need to sometimes to be able to help in sharing the wisdom and the experiences and the knowledge that I have been blessed with. So I would say, when looking for someone to disciple you, you want to look for someone who is also looking, but also you want to look for someone who has something to impart to you. And so I think what I mean when I'm saying that is, if someone has something that they have to share with someone, then they will share it with you. I know when I was younger, even though I wasn't looking for discipleship, and it maybe wasn't necessarily discipleship, a lot of times when I first moved here, there were a lot of older people in the congregation and not a lot of kids. And when we were at a game night that we had, a lot of the older men would sit around the table, and I would sit with them, and they would tell stories about what had happened when they were kids and experiences that had happened, but they would also talk a lot about the Bible. And that was a lot of the knowledge that I began growing around that time about the Bible. And so I think if someone has knowledge to impart to you, if they have the experiences to impart to you, then they're going to be imparting it to you already. And those are the people that you want to look for to build your relationship with, so that they can impart more detailed and specific knowledge to you.
Okay, good.
I would say that a lot of it falls on you and making sure, I don't know, I feel like if you are being sure to be striving to understand what God is saying, to study His Word, and if you're putting out a lot of effort to that, you'll find somebody who's doing the same. I think you're kind of drawn to each other because you can't help but noticing how much time that they spend in the Word, and you see their good example, and you see them get up and they lead prayers, they lead songs, or whatever else, they teach classes, any of that sort of thing. And so I feel like it's kind of, you're drawn to them, and so that helps out with it.
Okay, good. Yes.
Some great advice that I got in one of the women's classes at Bear Valley was to begin with the end in mind. And I think that's important in 3 different areas. First of all and foremost in our Christianity. You know, when you're looking for someone to disciple you, look for someone who demonstrates the traits, the characteristics of Christ that you know you need to have in your own life. And so look for someone who's already doing what you would like to be doing at their point in life, if that makes sense. So begin with the end in mind in your Christianity. I would also say, I think we need specific discipleship in our marriages. And so regardless if you are engaged in considering marriage, if you've already been married but you want to improve, you know, wherever you're at in your marriage, look for someone who has the kind of marriage that you want to have. Begin with the end in mind with your marriage, and then ask that couple to disciple you, to mentor you, to help you learn how to be a married couple. And then the same thing goes for parenting. With our children, we have to begin with the end in mind. Look for a couple who has already raised faithful children, and then ask them to help you raise your children. Ask them to help guide you through that process so that you can, and they're going to have advice for you of what not to do and what
That's
to
right.
do, I promise you. You know, but in all of those 3 areas, we need to begin with the end in mind and look for people who are where we want to be.
Oh, absolutely. And I think those are some great thoughts. You know, discipleship is a relationship, right? And so when you're doing this, I think there's a couple things that you guys need to keep in mind that you guys brought out. You know, sometimes we get the wrong impression by reading through the Gospels because, you know, the Gospels aren't in chronological order. If you haven't ever come across that already, just kind of heads up. They're not written the way we typically think of it. And so we'll read passages like Mark chapter 1 and verse 16, you know, verse 14, Jesus begins his ministry. He's proclaiming the gospel at hand. The time is fulfilled. Verse 15. Then in verse 16, passing along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Then going a little further, he sees James and John, the sons of Zebedee, calls them, and immediately they left, and they're following him. And so sometimes we think discipleship, just somebody's going to walk up and do this, and it's going to be this. But that's really not the first time they knew Jesus. If you go to the Gospel of John, you find out that these guys were first disciples of John the Baptizer, and then John pointed them to Jesus. And that's when they knew Jesus before he gave the call for them to follow. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you guys said. You know, you need to be looking for somebody. If you're looking for somebody to disciple you, you need to have in mind who do you want this person to be? What kind of a life do they need to live? Are they living the Christian life when they're not at services? Because I'm going to tell you something. That's a key thing to finding somebody to disciple you. I'm going to say this as nicely as I know how. I don't care how many songs you lead on services or how eloquent of prayers you say, or if you can teach the best Bible class in the world. If you go home and you're not living the life, then you're not ready to disciple somebody else. In fact, I would suggest that you need to repent and be discipled, because that's not what it's about. Jesus didn't call us to put on a show. He called us to live a faithful life. And so when it talks about discipleship, you need to know, what kind of life does this person live? Are they living the life as best as they can, day in, day out? Because here's the other side of this. When you're looking for somebody to disciple you, we've already kind of talked about this, but I want to throw it out by way of reminder. Don't look for perfect. There is no perfect. Look for mature. Look for biblical, mature Christians. That's what you look for, because there is no perfect. Nobody's perfect, okay? And so look for somebody that you can engage in that relationship with, okay? Discipleship, yes.
I was just also going to say, look for someone who's willing to invest in you and give you that time. Because I'll be honest, there are ladies that I have reached out to in my life, and they just never really reached back.
Right.
You know, and so that may happen sometimes. You may reach out to people, and for whatever reason, whatever's going on in their own lives, you know, whatever, they may not be able or willing to make the time that you're going to need for you at that point in your life. Don't get discouraged. Keep looking.
That's right. Yeah, and Lacey and I were thinking along the same lines. I was going to say, remember that the relationship should be both sided, right? It shouldn't just be all for you, coming from you, or all coming from them. A discipling relationship is a give and take kind of thing. Yes, they're probably going to be a little bit more mature than you if they're discipling you. But I tell you, if you are part of a discipling relationship, even if you are the discipler in the relationship, you're going to gain something from discipling somebody else. You're going to gain some perspective. You're going to gain some new ways of thinking. You're going to learn new ways of reaching people with God's message and helping them transform their life. You're going to learn the struggles that other people are facing, and it's probably going to be some struggles that you haven't faced yourself. And so you're going to have to wrestle with, how do I help somebody deal with this situation? The relationship has to be both sides coming together, both meeting. It's a relationship. It's not a school lecture. Mm-hmm. It's not, this thing where, I'm always just going to come and you're going to pour out into me and you're never going to get anything back. That's not the way the discipling relationship works. Both sides build and encourage and edify each other. Yeah.
Alright, sorry, this is just a question I just thought of. We've talked about before how, you're going to be at different levels in your spiritual growth at different times, and that sometimes those areas are going to be different. So, is it normal to have someone disciple you in like a certain area as opposed to like one person discipling you, period?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Okay, especially if there's something that you want to be like them in that area in. For example, one of the men that I have chosen to invest in my life is David Hamrick. The man goes around and establishes schools of preaching in various countries, been to multiple countries, does a lot of mission work, has done mission work for years and years and years. I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to be that kind of a person. I want to learn how to have that kind of a mindset where everywhere I go, I see ways to plant the gospel and spread the gospel seed, and that's something that I want. And so that's why I picked him. I called him up and said, hey, I want to be able to call you, and I want you to hold me accountable, and I want this to be a thing. And he said, okay. And so, if there's somebody that you feel like can really invest in you in a certain area, do that. Ask that person to be that discipler in that specific area if that's something that they're really good at. That's a great idea. Because here's the idea. Each one of us has different strengths and weaknesses, right? We've talked about this as a family, but the church is brought together with all these different people who have various talents and gifts that have been given to them by God. And somebody might have a gift in an area that I'm weak. And if I'm the only one that ever disciples you, then you're going to be strong in the areas I'm strong in a lot of times and weaker in the areas I'm weak in, because I don't know how to do that as well as other areas. And so, having other people invest in you is how you grow stronger. As I've gone through my faith walk, I've had different people pouring into me at different times, and they were strong in different areas. And so who I am today is not a result of any one person, but the people that God has put into my life that did disciple me and pour into me. They've all kind of come together and mished and mashed together, for better or worse, to what you see today, right? And that's how this process works.
Speaking of David, I would also like to point out we don't live anywhere near David Hamrick.
No, not even.
And most of the ladies that are most influential in me and my spiritual life, I don't live anywhere near them. This does not have to be someone just from your congregation.
Right, yeah, and we're going to talk more about that a little bit later. So, just kind of a heads up there. The other thing that I really want to say is, if you're looking for somebody to disciple you, I think it's really important that you find somebody who will hold you accountable, but do it in love. That's got to be there, right? It does no good for them to have this wisdom, to have this knowledge, and for them to be a part of your life if they're not going to say, hey, have you really thought this through? If they're not willing to do that. And I have met some people that are so averse to any kind of conflict that they really struggle with even saying, hey, is this the wisest idea? Well, sometimes if you're discipling somebody, it's not just, hey, is this the wisest idea? Sometimes you have to say, that's a dumb idea. Sometimes you have to look at them and say, what are you thinking? No, you cannot do that. Not only is that a bad idea, that's sinful. You can't do that. And so, if you're going to pick somebody to disciple you, make sure that they are a person that if they need to, they will hold you accountable to God's standards. And not in an ugly way, but they will do it with love for you and your growth in their minds and in their hearts. And so, I think that's one of those things that, again, we don't like to do well. We've already talked about that a lot, so we won't dive back into all of that. But that's something that I think is very, very important if you're talking about looking for somebody to disciple you. Okay, so now let's flip the coin over. And now let's say, what do I look for in picking somebody to disciple? What do y'all think about that? If you were going to pick somebody to disciple, what would you look for in that person?
Kind of stealing what Anna was saying earlier.
I was going to say it again.
So I talk first. So it's also a little like Andrew's. I kind of want someone who is looking, someone who is wanting to grow and like wanting that kind of relationship, whether they actually know what it is or not. But because people can be looking for something but not really knowing what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Side note. Anyway, so someone who is open to that kind of relationship and who is wanting to grow and learn more about God and strengthen their faith and things like that. Because if the person's not open to it, you're not going to get anywhere. And there's kind of no point in trying if they're not willing.
Yeah, if they're not willing, there's no point in trying that. Yep.
Well,
Good.
kind of also going back to what Anna said.
Lots of wisdom in this corner, right?
If in real and Anna were both saying, where real is like if sometimes people are looking but they don't know they're looking. Well, Anna said those people are just drawn to each other. And that is really true. A lot of times you don't know what you're looking for, but if you are looking to learn and to grow, even if you don't know it, you're going to be drawn to people who are looking to impart that wisdom, that knowledge and experience, to have that relationship with you. So while you are going to want to be looking and keeping yourself open and working towards finding this, a lot of times those people will come to you because you will be drawn to them and they'll be drawn to you.
Okay.
You just have to be able to keep your mind open to understand when they're there.
True. Okay.
Can I have anything?
No, all right, okay.
I would also say make sure that it's somebody that you can be sure to take the time to do discipleship right with. You don't want somebody in which your schedules are never going to match up, where you can, if you're at long distance, where you can take the time to talk to them and call them and actually check in and see how they're doing and have real discussions, or even in person, you want to be able to have real discussions with that person. So you want to make sure that you're able to at least have time to do that, if not be able to actually get together physically with them and build that relationship and take the time to have those discussions that you need to have and to be able to listen to them when they need it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things that I think is really important is that and if you're going to be looking for somebody to disciple, you need to count the cost. Okay? To become a disciple of Jesus, you have to count the cost. And part of that is the idea that you're going to give what you've learned to others. And so I think we all should. I think it's all part of becoming a disciple of Jesus, is that it's intended for us to pass on. However, that being said, to intentionally disciple somebody means you have to intentionally invest in that person. And a lot of times we're not willing to do that. We want to make this process easy for us. I don't need to, I can't give you this every week. You should just pick it up just by being around me, or something crazy like. I don't know what our mind is, but it's not realistic. Discipleship done right takes time. I mean, we look at Jesus, And we say, oh, he discipled those guys for 3 years. Yes, he discipled for 3 years. They were with him 7 days a week. Jesus had to go away and say, I'm going to go over here and pray. Y'all stay here. Like, I mean, when we talk about discipleship in the Bible, and especially with Jesus and the apostles, it was 24/7. 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year for 3 years. That's the kind of time that he invested in them. And somehow we want to, in our modern rush, run society, reduce that down to like a 30 to 45 minute Bible class for a few weeks and call it good. And that's not going to work.
Well,
it's just not going to happen.
And it's not like Jesus was like having a full-time job as well. The disciples had a full-time job, and like their families were like, no, they left their families, they left their jobs, and that was all that they focused on.
That's right. Yeah. So if you want the modern day equivalent to this, quit your job, get some support, and go to a preaching school. And that will be about the closest modern day equivalent that I can find for you. Because when I was in preaching school, I got up from 8 to like 3. It was nothing but learning the Bible classes. After we got done there, I would go home and say hi to my family. Then I would say bye to my family, and I would study, and I would write papers, and I would memorize scripture, and I spent so much time studying the Word that's all it was. Pretty much for 2 years. That's as far as I can think of, that's the closest equivalent that I could find to what Jesus did with the apostles.
Imagine you have your teacher come and live with you.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You might not want.
Okay, but here's the idea. When we talk about discipleship, we have to realize it's going to be, and it has to be an intentional thing. And so if I'm looking for somebody to disciple, there's number one, obviously, and we've stated this before, they have to be a Christian. Okay, if you're not a Christian, I'm not going to disciple you, I'm going to evangelize you. Okay? You need to know Jesus. That's step number one, right? Okay? That's the building block, that's the foundation. Okay? So don't try to approach non-Christians like you do Christians. It's not the same. It's not meant to be the same. It's not the same relationship in the Bible, right? Two, when I look for somebody to disciple, I want to find somebody that's active in their faith. I don't want somebody who comes and sits on Sundays and goes home and they don't do anything. And this sounds ugly, but if you're only there on Sunday mornings, I'm probably not going. You're not going to be on my discipling pickup radar. Sorry, but I want to see that you're living the life. I want to see that you're there on Sundays, and then if we're going out and doing some door knocking, hey, look who shows up. Hey, and if we're going to go over here and do a service project, who showed up? That's what I want to see, a faith that's active, somebody that wants to grow. Okay, that's what I want to see. Yeah.
I do think that's where a lot of congregations mess up in looking to help people, quote unquote, grow spiritually. They say, oh, this person doesn't come very often, so let's put them in a position of leadership, and maybe then they'll come. You know, they don't come very often, so let's make them a deacon over this, and maybe that'll help them come. Or let's have them teach a Bible class, and maybe that'll help them come. We have it backwards.
Yes, we have it very backwards. If somebody doesn't want to come because their relationship with Christ is weak, do not, church leaders, do not put them in leadership. Don't do that. That is irresponsible church leadership. Don't do that. We need to make sure that those people that we put in leadership positions are those people that love the Lord, those people that live out their faith, that are actively transforming themselves into the image of Jesus Christ. If they're not doing those things, they don't need to be leading. Because if they are leading, they're going to lead your church in a direction you don't want it to go. I can promise you that. Because if they're not trying to transform themselves into the image of Jesus, then wherever they lead you, it will not be towards Jesus. And so we need to make sure we do that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the same thing goes for discipleship, though. You know, we can't put people in positions to lead the church who aren't already leading in their own lives and don't already love the Lord. We can't effectively disciple someone who doesn't already love the Lord first.
Yeah.
It's backwards. It's the same thing. It doesn't work.
Right. So I want you to just understand that that's something I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody, when I'm looking to disciple, who is active in their faith, that wants to learn, that wants to grow. The second thing I'm going to be, I guess the third technically by this little list here, I want to see. I'm looking for somebody that's the same gender as I'm going to form discipling relationship with males, not females. And we've kind of talked about this, but just a brief recap. Some people might go, well, isn't that a little sexist? Nope, I call it wisdom. Okay? And here's why. The discipling relationship is meant to be a close, bonded relationship. They're going to share things with you as the discipler that are struggles for them, that are hard for them. You're going to reach out. Your heart is going to be poured out to these people. And if you are one male and one female in this relationship, that can put you in a very precarious situation. And wisdom just says, let's not go there. Let's have men disciple men and women disciple women, so that they can have that closeness and that connection that doesn't endanger anybody in a different way. And so when I'm looking for people to disciple, I'm looking for young men. And when my wife is looking for somebody to disciple, she's looking for young women. Because then those bonds can be built, and it's safe for everybody, and it's okay. And so I think there's a lot of practical wisdom in saying, when you're looking for somebody to disciple, find somebody that's the same gender as you. Don't look across those lines. Yes?
This is a hobby horse for me, so I'll try to keep it simple and short. But women, yes, we are equally responsible for spiritual leadership. We are not responsible for public leadership. We are not responsible for the leadership of men. But Titus 2, 3 through 5, we are to be discipling, teaching, mentoring, training other women. It is not a request. It is a biblical expectation. And we should be taking our own spiritual growth serious enough that we are trying to be the type of disciple of Jesus Christ ourselves, to where we can disciple other women, because that is God's expectation of us. And we should take our spiritual growth and our Bible study every bit as seriously as the men in our lives do.
Oh, and I will agree with that. My wife is exactly right. I have trained my daughters, at least I've done my best to train my daughters, to be young women who love the Lord, who love His Word, who serve in His church. And I've told them, I said, when you look for a young man, don't marry a pew sitter. If all he does is come and sit and go home, he is not for you. Whoever you find that you're interested in better be somebody who loves the Lord, who loves you, who loves the church, who wants to help you get to heaven, who can be that leader. And that's what I expect. This is not an open kind of thing. There's no negotiation in this, in my mind, right? Because each person is, a husband and a wife are both to be disciples of Jesus Christ and help each other get to heaven and follow the Lord and do the things that God calls us to do as His children. People say a marriage is 50-50. That is not right. Marriage is a 100-100 type of affair. You have to be all in. And that includes following the Lord together. So yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So, what advice would you give to parents who have children that they're discipling, and whenever they're looking for somebody outside of their family to disciple, in balancing being able to disciple their children and someone else? Because I know that you have experience with this, but obviously, their kids they've been given to them by God in order for them to disciple and raise up, so they're going to need to be a priority. So what advice would you give for balancing out the priority of that?
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That makes sense. The answer is really long. So I'm going to try to reduce this down.
Paraphrase.
So here we go. First of all, if you are not making discipleship something that you do in your home, change that first. Don't look outside your home first. I really believe that when we go and stand before God the Father, as a father, He's going to look at me and say, what did you do with those that I gave you? I believe the family is the proving ground for leadership in the church, and I believe that God established it that way for a reason, because He says very plainly that if you can't lead your family, you're not ready to lead His family. And so if you are looking to start discipling, look at your children, because that's the starting place. And so make these changes with them first. And then once you understand a little bit more about what you're doing with that, and you have the ability, because I'll be honest, when your children are younger, this is going to be so much harder to do. As your children get older, it becomes a little easier to do because they don't require so much time and focus and attention. When they're younger, you may not be in a phase of life where you can reach out to another teenage person to be able to disciple them, because your kids, when they're young, require constant training and attention, and the discipling relationship also. So you may have to wait. There's a concept in the Bible that we don't talk about very often, because we're very much a marching forward, chronological kind of thing. But there are certain seasons in your life that you go through, and certain tasks are easier to accomplish in certain seasons. And so if you have young children, I think that's where you need to start. As your children get older, that's when you really can begin to branch out, especially to other people's children, and reach out. Now, it might be that you have a little neighbor kid that's over at your house all the time. My advice, if that's the way it is treat them just like you treat your own kids. Disciple them along just like you disciple your own children. If you've got somebody else's kids that are living with you, just do what you do, and help them grow in that process. That's the short summary, very boiled down answer to that question. Yes.
Follow-up question. Okay, so you mentioned discipling like other people's kids. What is the best way to go about beginning that discipleship relationship and building it without interfering with the relationship between the kid and parent? Because I can see that being something that's very difficult, because the parents might get offended or something like that. So what is the best way to avoid that?
Okay, so
Maybe your job.
All right. So being a youth minister, this is not a foreign concept, right? All right. So here's how I handle that situation. I don't just disciple the kid. If you just disciple the children as a youth minister, you've missed it, because what you need to be doing is discipling the child and the parents as best you can.
That's why you're a family minister.
That's right. That's why I prefer the title family minister, because I believe it fits better with what the church needs and what's more biblical and focused. One of the things that, if you want to disciple my children, if you want to invest in their life, you know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to prove to me that you're that you're worthy of being their discipler. Which means I have to know you. I have to see your life. I have to talk with you about biblical things. Because if you don't have enough biblical knowledge, or if I see your life and it doesn't look like what it does on a Sunday morning, I don't want you discipling my children. And so if you want to disciple somebody's child, let that person know who you are. Let that person see you for who you really are. And see your desire for God. And see your desire for church, and for His church, and for service to Him, and for being like Jesus. And they'll let you. It takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But it will happen.
I was going to say, sometimes it may not. Sometimes Riel's right, and it does upset and bother the parents. And so if their parents are not supportive of the relationship, then maybe we need to wait a while relationship more before pursuing a discipleship relationship. Right. But at the same time, another thing I know that Jonathan and I both always try to do, because his job is to be a family minister, and we do view it as family ministry, not youth ministry. We are here to support, build up, and encourage the parents. And so when we are interacting with other people's children, we do our absolute best to increase and improve their relationship with their parents, their communication with their parents, their trust with their parents. We are very, very careful to not try to usurp that authority. We want to help that relationship. And so I feel like if the parents feel like you support them in their role as parents, then that's going to make a big difference also.
And that's exactly right. You have to do that. That what Lacey said is so very vital. You have to help enforce and build up that parent-child relationship, because in the end, the simple truth is, as much as you want to help that child, the parents are going to spend more time with them than you ever will, and so that has to come from them. And so building that relationship will help build trust. Yes.
Sorry, you keep making me think of more questions. Okay, so what do you do whenever the discipling relationship with the kid, whenever they surpass the parents? Because I can see that happening sometimes too, especially if the kid is a newer Christian, because new Christians have that fire that they want to grow, they want to go, and as we get older, we kind of lose that, and we get carried along by other things in life, so I can see that there being problems there. So what do you do in that position?
Okay, that's very specific to the situation. Just to be honest with you, a lot of that depends on the personality of the parents, what kind of relationship we have with that family. I mean, a lot of that's very specific. Generally speaking, what you can do is to continue to help them grow on an individual basis, the child, and then work on building that relationship with the parents so that you can step in and sometimes what happens is, as the children grow, the parents feel the pressure. And if you're building on this relationship with the parent, then when they don't know what to do, if you built your relationship with them and they see you as a godly person who's leading, a lot of times they'll come to you and they'll ask for support, and they'll ask, and it builds together. If you don't do that, if you don't build this relationship with a parent, then as the child grows and they feel the pressure, what happens is they blame you, and they shut it down. They stop the relationship, and that stops the discipling process of their children. So especially if you're going to be in that kind of a leadership role, you really have to take care to build that both up, and to be there, and to be that support, and to let the parents know, I'm in your corner. I'm not pressing your child against you. I'm in your corner. I'm here to help you grow in this process.
Okay.
Really, I feel like the ideal, and I know that's what it is, I know this isn't always possible, but the ideal, it's so important for inter-family relationships. If you are a family where all of your closest friends are in the world, they're not in the church, having this kind of relationship with kids and their parents is going to be almost impossible. It's ideal for your families to be friends, for your families to interact. I feel like here in Enid, we are so blessed because the families in our congregation are so like-minded. All of our kids spend time together. They all go to each other's houses or do things together or whatever, and our families interact and do things together. We are all like-minded, and we are all working towards the same goal. And so it is a very mutually beneficial, encouraging, and upbuilding environment. And wherever you are, if you can create that kind of an environment with the families, then it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to say, no, my kids can't go to your house, but you should send your kids to me, or things like that, that's not a good, healthy environment for this kind of a process. You know, but when you're all intermingling and interacting and helping and encouraging each other, then those relationships work together, and it can really be a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. All right, so going back to what do you look for in somebody who you want to disciple, one of the other things that is really important is teachability, right? When I'm looking for somebody and I say, is this a good person to disciple, I want to know, are you teachable? Because you can't pour into a cup that's already full. And so if you've got somebody who thinks they've already got it all figured out, there's not much you can do with that. Okay? So you got to find somebody that's teachable. If you know, I don't know how else to say it. It has to be there. They have to be willing to be humble enough. Huh?
You were talking about the cup, and if they're full of themselves, there's no room for God.
That's exactly right. Yeah. If they're full of themselves, there's no room for God. That's right. And so that's something that you really have to think about. And this is the hard part when it comes to the discipling process. Is that at some point in time, if you're the discipler, the person you're discipling is going to reach that point where they feel like, I'm up here with you now. And there is a time which they probably will be. But generally speaking, that comes a lot slower than what they want it to come. And so you have to learn to walk that balance. But teachability, that has to be a key concept. They have to be teachable. And sometimes, and this has happened before, sometimes you have to prove to that person that you're worthy to teach them, because they might feel like, who are you to teach me? And they might have to know you a little bit before they'll be willing to accept you as a teacher. Just like the apostles and Jesus. They knew who he was before they accepted him as their teacher. Sometimes you might have to go through that process.
And I would say that there is a difference between them like not being teachable and not accepting what you say, and them wanting to check and see if it matches up with what the Bible says. Because I feel like it would be very easy in a discipler relationship to, if they were authoritarian, this is what I have said, this is how it is, how dare you question me, I'm teaching you. And we can't do that because that's not biblical.
Well, and that will shut down the discipling relationship. How dare you question? I'm done. And I've had that happen. I've had people who were trying to pour some things into me, and I questioned, how do we know that's right? And they got really upset with me. Well, you just should accept it because I said it. My response was, well, you ain't Jesus. I don't have to accept anything from you, And so be ready for that. That's just part of it,
That's the thing. I think you need to understand when you're in this relationship, this is a mutual relationship. It's a choice on both sides. You only have the authority to teach this person if they give you the authority to teach them.
That's right. That's exactly right.
If you act out of turn, or if you try to act like you have all of the authority and they have no right to ask any questions or anything, they're going to choose to not listen to you anymore.
That's right. Yep. All right. And so one of the last things, there's two more things that I really want to hit on. One of it is their faithfulness to teach others. Is this person going to take what we give them and go out and do something with it? Yeah, I make it very clear to the people that I disciple that I want them to do something with it. That I push them towards teaching, towards leading in some way. It's an expectation. It's not an option. Like, if we're going to do this, this is the way it's done. You don't get to chicken out just because you're uncomfortable, just because you don't like it, just because you've never done it. I don't care about any of those things. That doesn't matter. This is the way it's going to happen. And if that's not okay, then that's great. I'm not the person for you. Because this is what happens. And look at how Jesus did it with his apostles. Look at how Paul did it with the guys that he decided. This is the way it works. They walk along beside you, and eventually you move them from the process of watching to them doing while you watch. And we've already talked about that in a previous episode, so you feel free to go back and watch that and talk about that again. But one of the things I look for is, how willing is this person going to be to take and do this beyond themselves? What I'm pouring into them, are they really going to accept the idea of going and turning and pouring that into other people? Because that's biblical discipleship. If we're not doing it that way, we might be encouraging people and building people up and edifying people, but that's not biblical discipleship. And that's something that needs to be considered. And the last thing is commitment. Are they committed to it? If they're not willing to put in the time, if they're not willing to make the effort to be there, then why would I? Because there might be somebody else out there that is. And so when I'm looking for somebody to disciple, I'm looking for somebody that's going to be committed to the process. And that's important to me. It's very, very important. I mean, look at what Jesus said, and we talked about that. Weigh the cost. And that's the same thing I ask people to do when I'm going to disciple them. Weigh the cost. Yeah.
I'm going to borrow a phrase that my mom always tells her clients who her work as a therapist, and I'm not sure if I'll get it exactly right, so excuse that. But she tells them, I will work just as hard as you will. So you have to put in however much effort you put in, I'll give back to you.
Yep.
But not more.
But not more. That's right, yeah. And that's the idea. Commitment. Commitment is important in the discipling relationship. Okay? And, I'm going to be committed to this thing, and you need to be committed to this thing. And that kind of brings us full circle back to something that we talked about last week, about the idea of a covenant. I talked a little bit about this, and I just want to kind of briefly hit on this. I don't use that often, because especially if it's a one-on-one discipling relationship, I don't feel like I need it. But the covenant is the idea of getting people to agree to it's a level of it's a way of increasing the level of commitment. And so if I was going to be doing that, I would be doing that with a group of people that I felt like maybe needed a little extra push, or maybe we're coming from very different backgrounds and I don't know them as well as I would like to, and it's going to be a process of getting to know them as we go through this process. That would be probably more along the lines of when I would use that kind of a step in the process, because if you're starting to do this with people maybe that you don't know as well as you would like, then maybe you're looking for a way to make sure that they are going to be committed to this process. And the great side about the covenant is if they decide, well, I'm not really committed, you can say, okay, well, then this process is done because you told me you would do this and now you're not. And it kind of gives you a way to hold things steady and hold the accountability level high, even though you may not have the personal relationship to support that by itself. And so just a little more information. Had some people throw out some questions and comments on that last time. So just a little bit more of an explanation about that. I hope that makes sense to you.
So for the covenant thing, would you also use it if you knew that the people that were going to be doing this with you didn't necessarily get along themselves? Like, not that you don't know them, but that you know them well enough to know that they don't get along? Or would it be better for you to disciple them individually then?
I would do those in different groups.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I was just wondering.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's just some things that you can think about. Now, one of the other sides to this, and what's our timeline?
It's 6:18.
So okay, all right. So all right. One of the other things that I wanted to put out to you guys to think about, and this is coming in more and more of a discussion, and it's still developing in a lot of ways. But how do we disciple somebody that doesn't live where we are? What would you think?
Take advantage of technology.
Okay.
I don't like it very much, and it gets really annoying because I don't know how to use it. But it does have its uses, so I feel like in that situation, it's definitely worth it to put out the time and effort to figure out a way to connect with them, or to make a phone call. That simple. I can do that. Just find something that you can do, or put out the effort to learn something new. That will help you.
Okay.
Well, and I think prayer is going to be a big thing in that, because you don't necessarily know what's going on in their life exactly whenever it's going on, because you don't have it as instant communication if you live further away. So if you keep them in your thoughts and prayers, I think that will be a big help. And also find out kind of what makes them happy that you can do. And that sounds weird, but a way to show them that you care about you, little things that you can do, whether it's writing them letters or something like that, not just to keep in touch, but just to let them know that you do care for that relationship. It's not just I'm going to teach you, it's I'm going to invest in you. Here's something I know that makes you feel cared about, so I'm going to do this for you. So get to know them and find out things like that you can do for them, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right, I'm going to throw some things out there. Again, this is something that, with COVID-19 and all of that, this is really kind of coming to a lot of discussions. One of the things that is hard about discipling somebody via distance is I can't be there. A lot of what we say isn't said with our mouths. Our expressions, our body language, that communicates a lot more than what the words that come out of our mouths say.
That's what emojis are for.
Yeah, emojis, yeah. And so the discipling relationship, if you're going to do this via distance, I'm going to recommend that you don't do it via text message. Okay, don't. Bad. Because here's the problem. What's the problem with communicating via text message?
It is hard voice. Yeah.
Yeah, there is no tone of voice. It's whatever's in your head. That's how you interpret
But if you're
that.
already upset, if you're angry, you're going to read it angry. If you're sad, you're going to read it sad. Like, there's no way it's
Exactly. Yeah. So text messaging is not. Don't try to disciple somebody doing texting. That is not going to work. Don't.
My
Okay.
dad and I have had issues with this to the point where now whenever we are having anything with any semblance of importance over text message, I'm like, this is said in this specific tone at the end of the message, because I've gotten in trouble way too many times for stuff that I did not intend to be taken that way.
Yeah. And so just be careful with that. Okay. If you want to try to do a form of discipling relationship via distance, the least that I'm going to say is a telephone call. Hear their voice. Hear the vocal inflections. Talk with them, right? You can learn a lot by the way somebody says things. You can read and hear a lot more about what's really going on with them in that way. Do video chats. Man, there's so many different options, okay, that you can do out there. You can do Zoom. You can do Skype. You can do FaceTime. You can do, there's so many options, okay? So do something like that. And here's the big thing. Make a regular time. If you can't be there physically, then I'm going to tell you something. That consistency is going to be very, very, very important. So much more than if you can actually get together. If you're in physical proximity, you may not be able to get together Wednesday, let's do it tomorrow, or whatever. You can make those but via electronic, it may not be as easy to do that, because if you got people that you're talking about that are on the other side of the globe, right? You're going to have to find a time, and it's going to have to be very consistent on both ends to make that happen. Because if there is no consistency, the discipling relationship won't be there. And so if you're going to try to do distance type stuff, you have to have a way to hear and see communication that takes place at a level that's deeper than text messaging. Yes?
So I have to say, my two closest friends don't live anywhere near me, and we really, one of them lived close to us for a short period of time, but other than that, I've never lived close to them. And our friendship did start via text, just text messages here and there, but it took a very, very long time for that to grow into a mutually, spiritually edifying and encouraging relationship, because that was our primary means of conversation. And now we've been friends long distance long enough that I know their tone of voice from their text messages, because we really don't get to see each other in person very often. But like I said, that took a long time for that level of trust and, trust to grow only through text message. But then also even things like Marco Polo, just sending videos that maybe it's not a back and forth conversation, but just to let you know that let them know that you're thinking about them, to encourage them. Even I have one lady that I absolutely adore. She sends me a scripture every single day, and has for years now. And so now I've started forwarding that scripture on to other women every single day. Things like that can be very, very powerful.
Yes.
And so, because once again, discipleship starts with a relationship. So, especially if it's somebody that doesn't live by you, I recommend focusing on the relationship first, and then letting it grow into a discipleship relationship, and not just reaching out to someone that you really don't know all that well and be like, hey, let me disciple you now.
Right.
Invest in the relationship first.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw a little bit more onto what Lacey was saying, because yes, those relationships started via text message, but they really didn't take off until they met in person.
Yeah.
And they actually got to know the voice behind the messages.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about this idea of discipling via distance is, at some point in time, it has to be where I know you and you know me. And it's not just something, and maybe meeting in person isn't always going to be possible, but if it is possible, even if it is 1, 2, 3 times a year, getting together is going to be a very key, vital part of that. And so I'm not going to say it's impossible to do it via distance, but I will say it's going to be a lot different and a lot harder and a lot more time intensive if you're going to try to do a discipling relationship that's via technology and distance. simply because proximity makes a difference. And that's not to say you can't be done. I'm just saying if you choose to do it that way, be ready, because it's going to be a lot more work, and you're going to have to invest a lot more time and consistent time at that in those other methods.
I just want it to be an encouragement, because not everybody has
Yes.
a congregation that is super focused on spiritual things. Not
That's right,
everybody has someone locally who is wanting to grow, who's willing to invest in them. And so I want, if you're in that situation, I just want you to know, there are other options, and it can work. It may be harder, it may be a little bit different, but, find someone who's willing to invest in you spiritually, even if it's not somebody who's right there locally with you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I agree 100% with what Lacey said. Look, I understand that, especially, if you're in a smaller congregation out there somewhere, there might not be those people who are willing and able to do this. They might not have ever thought about it. It might not be anything that they've ever had done. They don't know how, whatever. If you're in that situation, there are other options. And she's exactly right. You should reach out, and you would be surprised. You might find that, I have found this to be so true over and over again. The brotherhood is a really small. I don't know somebody in your area doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't. And so maybe you can work a connection that way. Maybe it is that that a discipling relationship is started over online or over the distance via the phone, whatever it is. And those things can be good, and those things can grow. And so if you don't have any other option, reach out. Reach out to people, because there are others out there who want this and who want to see this happen, and who will put out the effort to make sure that this happens for you. And so just make sure that you understand that that is available to you.
And don't make assumptions. Don't be afraid to ask. If they can't do it, they can't do it. But don't be afraid to ask. There's a young lady I'm working with right now, and it was so funny. I guess she'd been thinking about it for a while, and she was like, "But I know you're really busy, and I didn't want to ask because I figured you were already working with so many people, and there's no way you would have time." And I was like, "I've got time for this, But she had been afraid to ask, because she was afraid that I wouldn't have time, and that's not the case at all, So just don't assume that somebody can't. At least ask.
Yeah, at least ask, right? Somebody said this to me once, and I really thought it was kind of funny. He said, "When I look for people to get things done, I look for the busiest people I can find, because those people always find a way to get it done, while other people may or may not." And so, even if somebody looks like they're busy, ask. Because you know what, I'm going to find something to do. There's very rarely that I do nothing. Okay, but I'm also a guy of priorities, and so if I think that this is more important than this goes away so that this can be there. And so don't make assumptions. Ask, and let the person that's on the other end make the decision about what's most important and whether or not they can or can't. Don't make that decision for them and say, "Well, I just won't even ask," because you deprive them of a chance to bless your life, and you deprive them, and you get deprived yourself of being blessed in that way. So don't do that. Don't make that mistake. All right. Any last thoughts you guys want to throw out? Okay. Well, we're going to call that one good for tonight. I think this might be the first time we got done in less than an hour.
Nope.
Oh, not
No,
oh, never mind. Okay, exactly an hour. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I hope that this has been good for you. I hope that you are learning a lot and growing a lot through this process. Please join us back next week at 5:30 on Wednesdays, and we will continue our discussion over the discipleship aspects that are needed in the church today. God bless.